This is our crew for the day. So if y'all would like, we can jump on in. Let me share my screen. Can y'all see that?
Mm-hmm.
Now let's see how, where's the presenter mode?
Slideshow.
Thank you. Usually I do this on Google Docs and then, I tried something new. Of course, I can't figure out how to do it. All right, well, most of y'all, I think, were with us last week when we started jumping into Nehemiah and then looking at it as we framed it around this book that called Solved, Finding, in a World of Problems, Finding God's Solutions by Talbot Davis, who is still the minister over at Good Shepherd United Methodist. And we talked about Nehemiah chapter 1, verses 1 through 20, when Nehemiah gets word that Jerusalem is still, even though the exile is over and that some of the Jews have returned to Jerusalem, that Jerusalem is still in absolute disaster, as if it had just been ransacked by the Babylonians. In this section, we're going to look at two passages, Nehemiah 2, 1 through 20, and then Nehemiah 5, verses 1 through 19. I'll just jump on in, because why not? It's a long passage, but this is where, just to kind of start us off, let me try to get y'all over here. This is where we have Nehemiah requesting to go, and then on the next slide, we'll see that. If anyone would like to read, we can divide it up, or I'm happy to read as well. I will be happy to read this slide. Oh, Rich, that'd be great.
Okay, let's try that. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was served, I carried the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had never been sad in his presence before. So the king said to me, "Why is your face sad, since you are not sick? This can only be sadness of the heart." Then I was very much afraid. I said to the king, "May the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my ancestors' graves, lies waste and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" Then the king said to me, "What do you request?" So I prayed to the God of heaven. Then I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor with you, I ask that you send me to Judah, to the city of my ancestors' graves, so that I may rebuild it." The king said to me, the queen was also sitting beside him, "How long will you be gone, and when will you return?" So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a date. Then I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, let letters be given me to the governors of the province beyond the river, that they may grant me passage until I arrive at Judah, and a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forests, directing him to give me timber to make beams for the gates of the temple fortress, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall occupy." And the king granted me what I asked, for the gracious hand of my God was upon me. Then I came to the governors and the province beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent officers of the army and cavalry with me. When Sanballat the Hornite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard this, it displeased them greatly that someone had come to seek the welfare of the people of Israel.
Wonderful. Thank you. I thought we could talk a little bit about this passage before going into the next 10 verses. A few things I wanted to point out, and then would love to open it up to sort of what stood out to y'all, is while the king's Cyrus, which is the first Persian king that ended the exile and allowed the Jews to return, we see that more in Ezra, and then here we have Artaxerxes, who is another king. We recognize that they are while they're foreign, they are kind of recognized as good people, good kings, because they are showing kindness and favor to the Jewish people. And here in this sort of, the king said to me, "Why is your face sad since you are not sick?" Here he is showing like personal kindness and recognition that he knows his servant or his official, and he's responding to it. And he also knows that he's not just, this is not a sickness or sadness of just sort of something passing, but it's deep, he says, of the heart, or it's a spiritual sadness. Then the other thing we note is Nehemiah, so I pray to the God of heaven, seeking God's guidance, God's leadership in terms of how he will approach the king in his request. And then looking at, if you'll notice that Nehemiah says, "I ask that you send me to Judah, the cities of my ancestors' graves, so that I may rebuild it." We never hear Jerusalem named in front of the king, because Jerusalem is known to be sort of one scholar calls it the hotbed of resistance or revolution. And so I think everyone knows that he's talking about Jerusalem, but in sort of courtly politeness and maybe just the Southern way of asking, the most roundabout way to discuss something. He refuses to name Jerusalem, but they all know that he's going. And there's an implication that he's not just asking to go there, but he's asking to be the governor. There's a lot of scholarship as to why this is not named, but later it is said that he is the governor of Judah, Jerusalem. How long will you be gone? Again, we don't know the date that Nehemiah told him how long he would be gone. I mean, because of travel time and everything, it probably would have been a couple of years, but perhaps not the real 12 years that Nehemiah was in Jerusalem as governor. Maybe he got there and was able to sway him to stay a little bit longer, like we all hope to do on vacations. But again, here we have, if you actually jump down to verse 8, the very end, "And the king granted me what I asked for the gracious hand of God was upon me." A little bit about what we talked about last week with problemists. We talked about how our solutions sort of create problems, but if we seek God's solution and God's plan for us, that's when the problems sort of disappear. And here, he's received everything he needs. He's gotten permission to go. He's received letters to travel. He's going to get the wood for all the construction he needs, all because God has allowed it, or has, is sort of watching over him with a gracious hand of my God was upon me. And then finally in 9 and 10, we see him traveling, and Sanballat and Tobiah sort of are displeased that he's coming through. And this is going to be definitely, this is sort of foreshadowing some conflict that will arise in chapter 4. That's just the foreshadowing. What are things that jumped out to y'all or struck you in this passage?
What I noticed was that he went through all the proper steps in order to get it done. He didn't, he did all the right things to accomplish his goal.
Absolutely.
No understanding, or other than saying it was going to Judah instead of, it sounded good incorrectly.
Yes. There's no cutting corners, proper steps. Absolutely.
I was going to say that, it looks like he sort of prayed in desperation between when the king said, "What do you request?" and what he offered. But I have a feeling, because of his face being sad, that he had been thinking about this a long time, and probably God had helped him develop a plan. So I don't think it was as spur of the moment as it looks.
Yeah. When I was reading this, I always thought it was sort of like when someone asks you a question, either you sigh or you do that very dramatic inhale. Sort of, maybe that was his prayer of preparing himself, or so despondent over the way he was feeling of Jerusalem's state. that, you know, this was his last sort of effort to make it, or I'm not describing that right, but I'm glad you pointed that out, Barb.
And it almost feels like you mentioned sort of that inhale where you like, okay, before I start, but it's a silent prayer. It almost, you know, praying, stopping to pray to God is in a way giving up a claim on the outcome. And so, you know, it's like he went to him with, you know, here's what I have, without expectation, in a way that, you know, released him from being disappointed, or if it didn't happen. That I'm probably putting too many words in Nehemiah's mouth, but just praying to God as a way of giving up control of the outcome.
Piggyback.
I really like that.
I was saying last week how I see this as a model for mission, and so again, I see what you're saying is that Nehemiah is not taking it, and although it's kind of about him leading it all and doing it all, there's a lot of eyes to the book because it's a memoir, but it's not like I'm doing this and I'm going to go do this and it's me, and it's not that, because that can be very, very hard in mission to think that one person is going to go and accomplish something. But it's first relying on God. That's the huge step. And that's what you're pointing out, is that, oh, in mission, we don't do that. We don't just say, I'm going to do this. We say, we pray to God and say, God, lead us through this. And then he really can use Artaxerxes' help. I mean, he's not going to be able to do it all on his own. And so he's getting the king's help. The king comes out really nice in this, as Robert says. I mean, he seems very sensitive and helpful. Wow. Is a great guy, but so I don't see that very often. But anyway, so he's getting that help, and he'll get more help in chapter 3. So I think it's nice that he's it's a kind of realization that he can't do it on his own.
Yeah.
Another thing that stands out to me is that last line, that these officials were displeased that someone would come and seek the welfare of the people of Israel. You know, they were supposedly the officials in charge. I mean, is that how we're supposed to read their role? But they have no interest in someone coming from the outside to make life better for them. So, you know, they were very happy oppressing them.
They really didn't. They didn't want Israel to get any help. But normally when we ask for help, we don't ask it in a negative way. We don't kind of give the impression that you're not going to help me. We always ask for help in a positive way. But in this incident, he had already asked the Lord for help. So he was already in the right place.
Absolutely. And Gerald, as you know, we'll see a lot of that sort of oppression come into play with chapter 5.
So do you know, I think these guys, Sanballat and Tobiah, were actually leaders of neighboring cities or regions, and they don't want Jerusalem and Judah to be a power. They want the power themselves. They don't want any other powerful cities around, I think, is where it's coming from.
Oh, okay. I didn't look that up.
I'm not 100% sure, but that's the way that's the sense I got.
That is, Rich, you're right. These are sort of the neighboring governors. Mm-hmm. And so one thing I thought is, one, I think they sort of represent the oppressive powers that be, which will come into play. And so anyone coming to uplift the sort of the colonies is never approved of. But I almost thought, it says, it displeased them that greatly someone had come to see the welfare of the people of Israel. But also, I wonder if they're displeased, and this is reading into the text that is not there, they're displeased because here is Nehemiah receiving so much privilege and personal, privilege from the king that they probably are not receiving themselves. I was maybe there's an aspect of jealousy there.
Yeah, there probably was. Why is he getting all this help?
Yeah. Because, I'd like to go and ask Biden to be governor of North Carolina. I mean, Roy Cooper's great, but I think I'd do a great job, y'all.
You could,
Carol's
you
like,
could
oh
be
God,
our,
no.
you could serve in the Senate.
Yes.
I'd like that nice gubernatorial mountain retreat. I've seen that. That's lovely. Anyway, we'll jump to the next section. This is really where this section is going to play more into the way that our book has framed it. So I'll just jump in and read. So I came to Jerusalem and was there for 3 days. Then I got up during the night, I and a few men with me. I told no one what
You're
God.
not on the slide, Robert, if you want us to see the slide.
Pardon?
Is that right? Oh, I'm
I see.
sorry. Forgive me. Forgive me. Forgive me. Forgive me. Okay.
I see it.
Small group so I can embarrass myself.
Are we all seeing the correct thing?
Yeah. I
Okay.
think so.
When it's just a big block of text, it's hard to distinguish.
Okay.
It was like when I was taking math courses, Rich. I just didn't understand anything I was looking at. I told no one what God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. The only animal I took was the animal I rode. I went out by night to the valley gate, past the dragon spring, into the dung gate, and I inspected the walls of Jerusalem that had been broken down and its gates that had been destroyed by fire. Then I went onto the fountain gate and to the king's pool, but there was no place for the animal I was riding to continue. So I went up by the way of the valley by night and inspected the wall. Then I turned back and entered up by the valley gate, and so returned. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing. I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, and the rest that were to do the work. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with the gates burned. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem so that we may no longer suffer disgrace. I told them that the hand of my God had been gracious upon us, and also the words that the king had spoken to me. Then they said, let us start building. So they committed themselves to the common good. But when Sanballat the Hornite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they mocked and ridiculed us, saying, what is this that you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king? Then I replied to them, the God of heaven is the one who will give us success, and we, his servants, are going to start building. But you have no share or claim or historic right in Jerusalem. So we see some of the similar elements in here. If you look at 12b, I told no one what my God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. I think, again, we're sort of that this idea and this motivation has come from God to help rebuild Jerusalem. Nehemiah is doing this inspection without interruption of anyone who's sort of that could bring up roadblocks saying this costs too much, we can't do this, X, Y, and Z. He wants to go in with a new pair of eyes, a fresh set, to be able to really examine what is the true status or state of Jerusalem. Looking a little further down, what I really want us to point out is 17b, come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem so that we may no longer suffer disgrace. While this is the first time Nehemiah is probably ever in Jerusalem, I mean, we kind of know that for a fact, he's including himself in the community of Jerusalem into that these are his people as well, even though he probably never met them, but this is the city of their ancestors. And so he, with all of the residents there, are suffering disgrace because of the state of the city. So there's this definitely, Rich, you put it really well, there's a lot of eyes because it is a memoir, but control is giving to God. A lot of this is sort of attributed to the idea, or the motivation is given to God. It's a community effort that must be, this must be a community endeavor so that they can sort of restore the glory of Jerusalem or the glory of God. And again, we see in 19 and 20 that those neighboring powers that be are still sort of causing issue, but here we have Nehemiah rebuke them and really sort of destroy their claim or historic right in Jerusalem. Anything y'all want to point out before we sort of how our book frames this section in chapter 2?
I was a little taken by the fact that
I think Nehemiah's handling it greatly right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I agree, Nancy.
well, what I saw there in the latter verses here that what an age-old conflict it is between here his case is Judah, but Israel and the Arabs and others surrounding what they're doing and trying to here the Nehemiah is saying you have no claim to this land, and here we are 2,500 years later having the same conflict playing out all the time.
Yeah. Those who have been to the Holy Land, do you have more perspective on that? I mean, it's very true. It seems it's a constant struggle for Jerusalem or Israel or Judah, however you want to refer to it.
Well, and those who desire the land for religious purposes are leaning on texts like this all the time of saying God in heaven is the one who will give success. So it's God that has given us this land. It's it's our right, and you have no claim. So they lean on these kind of, even the people who aren't religious particularly will still lean on these texts, but for political reasons.
Yeah. Well, the book. Oh, sorry. No, you go
Well, I
ahead.
was just going to say one other thing I had not yet told, and he lists these categories of the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, and the rest. So it's interesting that there's this categorization of people there, that much society had reformed. So there was that much structure or hierarchical structure to the society. So they obviously were functioning, and had been for 100 years or more, but it's interesting that he spells it out and all those specific categories of people.
That's a wonderful point, Gerald. I think it does highlight that society has rebuilt and structured them, has a strong structure, it appears, while the city does not. Maybe that is a subtle way to highlight the difference.
And here they are functioning in the middle of all this destruction of the temple, and not looking around to see what kind of mess the city was in, with the gates down, and they were doing their part with the government. I guess we call that government.
Yeah.
The government function in the midst of destruction. And maybe we do that all the time.
Well, Nancy, you are looking at my notes, because that is where Talbot Davis, the author, sort of frames this chapter, chapter 2 in Nehemiah. He argues that we get used to things that shouldn't be there. And he talks about sort of little bits of paper in his garage, or I always laugh, it's like, I can't see the dust on my baseboards, but I can see it at other people's houses. But he talks about, it could be mess, just sort of the mess of your city, or, I mean, if you live in a town that has a litter issue, maybe you don't notice it, but a visitor would come. Sometimes it could be seen as abuse. Unfortunately, in abusive relationships, people come to expect or settle with that. And I will leave it at that, because that's a very difficult topic. Or behavior, sometimes when
Because we
go ahead, Nancy.
we get accustomed to our own mess. We look, we don't see it anymore.
Absolutely. And the same thing is, we see it in behavior. I have 2 very little cousins who act a fool, and we just sort of accepted it because that's just what they do, but it's still not right. But Davis was saying that when the Jews resettled Jerusalem, when they resettled, they settled. They could not see the true state their city was in, so Nehemiah's fresh eyes were needed to examine and inspect the work that was needed. So I want to pose some questions to y'all. Do y'all agree with this perspective that when you're living amongst whatever, that you can no longer see the work that needs to be done?
I'm remembering, and I think it's Malcolm Gladwell, but he has this, he touted this broken windows theory. And what had happened, some of you might know this better than I, but what a city did is they saw a neighborhood that was crime ridden, and it had, it was a place for drug interactions, and it was all broken down. There were broken windows and litter, and so what they chose to do, the people who were trying to kind of rehabilitate this neighborhood, was to fix the broken windows and clean up. And some people looked at them and said, well, why are you doing that when you've got so many issues here? Shouldn't you be focusing on the crime and the drug use? And what happened when they began to repair the city, the broken windows, is that people then began to take responsibility. So if that also plays here, it would make sense that with the city broken down, their behavior would be poor, as we'll see in chapter 5. The sad thing in Nehemiah is that fixing the walls actually didn't fix the behavior. But anyway, that theory keeps coming to mind, that when your world is in shambles, you are less likely your behavior is more likely to be in shambles.
Yeah, I agree with that, but we have to nibble at the edges in order so people can see what it could look like if they would just pick up the trash in their yard.
Yeah. That's a wonderful perspective, Gerald, and I think that applies really well here. Thank you. Can y'all think of things that you have gotten used to in terms of where we have settled? And I'll just do a follow-up question, and if you noticed it, how did you unsettle yourself? A silly thing is, my first apartment I loved it to death, but it was, we call it Boo Radley's house, because it was just so down in the heel. And if you scrub the windows hard, the molding would come off, and so the pane would fall out. So it just was, it was rough, but living by yourself at 23, it was fantastic. But because it was so sort of run down, I didn't clean it as much, I didn't vacuum as much as I should have. And so it just kind of made it look even worse. And then I'd clean it and I thought, wow, this place isn't as bad as I thought. It still wasn't great, but it was still, as a sort of, I don't know what got me unsettled. Maybe I just got fed up with it, but living amongst a ramshackle place didn't make me want to take care of it, I would say. So I kind of understand the Jews in this situation. But where's some place that
I'd say another thing is just our racial reckoning stuff. I'll put Barb on the spot. She's taken this whiteness series with Penn. Isn't that what this is about, Barb?
Yeah, it's kind of opening your eyes to what you've just been used to your whole life, to see maybe how the other side lives. And yeah.
Barb, if I may ask, what prompted sort of you signing up for that course? Was it, the action events of 2020, or just the opportunity arose?
Well, I think 2020 was part of it, but the fact that we have been trying to have a Girl Scout troop at Wilson all black middle school the last 3 years, I've seen a lot of things that I couldn't explain or didn't understand. And so it's helped me a lot to understand who I'm, the girls that I'm working with and the teachers, and why the parents are reluctant to trust white ladies, um, all that kind of thing. So it's helped me quite a bit.
Thank you.
How was the troop doing, Barbara?
Well, during lockdown, we really couldn't do much. We tried to Zoom, but that wasn't really a success. um, so right now we're putting together graduation bags because our 8th graders will be moving off to high school. So we're trying
Oh,
to have one more touch before they go off to high school.
That's wonderful. How are ways that we can, and I think maybe I'm asking for for advice from y'all, is how can we put sort of a fresh set of eyes on things in our own life? Is, Nehemiah was brand new to the situation, so he saw what, a lot of what was in the background for the residents stood out to him. But in what way can we inspect our own lives the way Nehemiah inspected the walls?
I really think it takes getting with other people and talking and helping point out in each other what the blinders are, where we may not be seeing the whole picture. I really trust that the group is better than the individual with that.
That's very reformed, Barb, but I agree. That is usually where I've found help in others.
Blame this on me being a child of the 90s, but I think about like weight loss or like deciding that you're going to suddenly start exercising or start eating right. And you see those shows where they go through and they throw away all the bad food. And yesterday you were perfectly fine eating that bad food. And today they just threw away like 15 bags of, crackers and chips and candy. And I think like sometimes that wake up call comes in. I knew that all along. I just needed a good reminder. And you get your good reminders from the people that you hang out with that you look up to, not the people who are eating crackers with you or whatever,
Yes. It's a little too close to home, Delilah Jane.
well, and I find that I live in an apartment complex that's, when I say mixed, is, black and white, 20s and 80s, but my way to fit in here has been through the children. I use my walker to walk, and I keep lollipops in my walker, and it's such a good opening and for me to meet the parents of the kids. So it's really great that but you have to reach out and welcome people and acknowledge who we all are. And that this one lady, Maxine, I walk every day, twice a day religiously, and she keeps telling me she's gonna walk with me. Well, I'll praise hallelujah when that day comes, but it's not there yet. But it's amazing what good we can do with with getting acquainted with the kids in our neighborhood. And I'm thinking about you, Barb, and the uh, Girl Scouts. Because what you do with them bleeds out into the adults.
Thanks, Nancy. You're right, although that bleeding out is very slow.
It is slow, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then, you know, I mean, and I know we don't say, you don't stir the pot and it all happens, because it takes a long time for the result, for us to see the fruits of our labor.
Wonderful, Nancy. Thank you. One thing I just want to remark upon before we move to our next section is the other thing, I think, sort of how do we unsettle ourselves, is how Nehemiah has done it. Is we saw in the previous section of, I said a prayer to God before he, he makes his request to the king. And then here, I told no one what my God had put into my heart. So I think almost the ability to see what was needed was God had put it there. And so truly prayer and sort of reflection on what God's will is for us will help us sort of see the dirt, see where we have settled, but as we all know. All right. Our next section was Nehemiah 1 through 19. These are very long. They're pretty much just chapters, but luckily Nehemiah is just short. I'm trying to look at the time. For the sake of time, shall we? Well, we can read it. Would anyone like to read this portion? This is just the first part, and we'll discuss it a little bit.
I can read that.
Thank you, Barb.
Now there was a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish kin. For there were those who said, with our sons and our daughters, we are many. We must get grain so that we may eat and stay alive. There were also those who said, we are having to pledge our fields, our vineyards, and our houses in order to get grain during the famine. And there were those who said, we are having to borrow money on our fields and vineyards to pay the king's tax. Now our flesh is the same as that of our kindred. Our children are the same as their children, and yet we are forcing our sons and daughters to be slaves, and some of our daughters have been ravished. We are powerless, and our fields and vineyards now belong to others. I was very angry when I heard their outcry and these complaints. After thinking it over, I brought charges against the nobles and the officials. I said to them, you are all taking interest from your own people. And I called a great assembly to deal with them and said to them, as far as we are able, we have bought back our Jewish kindred who had been sold to other nations, but now you are selling your own kin. You must then be bought back by us. They were silent and could not find a word to say. So I said, the thing that you are doing is not good. Should you not walk in the fear of our God to prevent the taunts of the nations, our enemies? Moreover, I and my brothers and my servants are lending them money and grain. Let us stop this taking of interest. Restore to them this very day their fields, their vineyards, their olive orchards, and their houses, and the interest on money, grain, wine, and oil that you have been exacting from them. Then they said, we will restore everything and demand nothing more from them. We will do as you say. And I called the priests and made them take an oath to do as they had promised. I also shook out the fold of my garment and said, so may God shake out everyone from house and from property who does not perform this promise. Thus may they be shaken out and emptied. And all the assembly said, Amen, and praise the Lord. And the people did as they had promised.
Thank you, Barb. Just to highlight a few things in this is in chapters 3 and 4, 3 is the great list of who had been helping rebuild the walls and the gates. And then 4 is issues or sort of trouble with the neighbors, which we had seen foreshadowed in 2. Here we have people, while the city is in ruins, it seems like society is also in ruins, and we're seeing the problems that they are facing, and it's truly just their basic needs are not being met. There appears to be about 3 groups that sort of are presenting their complaints today, or in this story, is those who cannot afford grain, those who are going into debt to buy their grain, and the other one are those who are having to sell their children as slaves or risk sexual violence to afford food or the tax. And so what's being discovered is that it's sort of Jew on Jew oppression a little bit. And so Nehemiah's solution is to make sure that in Jewish law, they're not allowed to lend money, but you can, or it's a weird distinction. It's, they're not disobeying Jewish law, but you can have contracts or pledges here, and it's sort of that workaround from taking interest. You can lend, but you can't take interest. And here they're sort of manipulating that loophole, or some of them, it says, you are all taking interest from your own people. So they are sort of disobeying law, and Nehemiah is asking them to provide what they need without, and return to their possessions so that they can provide for themselves. The other thing that's sort of implicit in here is so many people there's a famine because so many people have been working on the walls and the gates that they haven't been in the fields to actually farm. And so now there's a shortage of food. No one can afford food. It's sort of a cyclical thing. They're focusing on one thing and forgetting the other. Anything else that y'all want to see? I'm just sort of trying to move quickly on. I'm going to jump to just the next section, so then we can sort of look at it as a whole. Moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year of the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, 12 years, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allowance of the governor. The former governors who were before me laid heavy burdens on the people and took food and wine from them, besides 40 shekels of silver. Even their servants lorded it over the people, but I did not do so because of the fear of God. Indeed, I devoted myself to the work on this wall and acquired no land, and all my servants were gathered there for work. Moreover, there were at my table 150 people, Jews and officials, besides those who came to us from nations around us. Now that which was prepared for one day was 1 ox and 6 choice sheep. Also fowls were prepared for me, and every 10 days skins of wine in abundance. Yet with all this, I did not demand the food allowance of the governor because of the heavy burden of labor on the people. Remember for my good, O my God, all that I have done for this people. One of the scholars that I read was sort of laughing. They're like, this is Nehemiah's memoir, so isn't he just the absolute best ruler? Just so wonderful. They said it's probably embellished a little bit, but it's in this is the governor's expenses were supposed to be taken out of the taxes. So if you had more expenses, this is a good math question, is, you have to pay a base to the king in Persia, but your expenses go up, so you tax the people more to cover your cost. And so what Nehemiah is saying is he's just not costing the people anything, that he is primarily there to work. He's doing all of this as almost a mission that he's covering his costs so that there isn't an issue for the people and they're provided for, but he's also feeding them himself out of his own pocket with the table set for 150 people. The way Talbot Davis frames this chapter, he calls it the Food Network Solutions, which I thought was a little rough of a title, but the meat of the chapter was great. He was sort of asking, this is sort of what moves you into action. Here with Nehemiah, he was seeing the injustice And so he responded accordingly. He saw that the people's needs were not being met. So what he did was to correct the system of injustice and made sure that the officials, those who were in power to lend or take promissory notes, stopped that and returned all to the people so that they could sort of be self-sufficient. And then he goes beyond that and becomes sort of a source of abundance for the people. He makes sure that he is not taking their resources as well, but he's also sort of providing just food or shelter for these people, and not just the ones who live there, but we even see for all who came to us from the nations around us, which is, he's still obeying foreign law, so because we have to, welcome the foreigner among us. But he talks about sort of what moves us into action. In this situation, it's the very name of God is at stake, because if God's nation, Judah or Jerusalem, is suffering, then there's sort of an implicit idea that God is not suffering, but the reputation of God is suffering. So how do we translate inward movement? Nehemiah is inwardly moved by the situation of his people into outward action. And here we have it in terms of correcting the system or punishing those who won't correct themselves. And I was like, and I'm looking at this group, this is a very mission focused group, but where have you been motivated? And then sort of how does that, instead of just sort of thinking about it, or the book starts talking about, and then we form a study group. And I thought, ooh, that is so Presbyterian. I guess the Methodists and the Presbyterians are very more similar than sometimes we like to admit.
I'm kind of struck in this section about that Nehemiah is following this idea of that God is saying, as I am holy, you should be holy, and what comes out and how he's reflecting God is in generosity and compassion and all that. So it seems to me that allowing that of God to flow through you and overflow out of you is kind of what he was doing, and what we are called to do, but we're able to do it only because we know that there's this constant flow in. So we're always being filled, but then do we allow it to spill out into others? So it seems to me his practice here really is reflecting God's character, and I think that's what we're called to do as well.
Well said.
This is a challenging chapter. I mean, it's really calling for a lot of social justice. It's there's a lot of focus on class here. I first noticed it when Gerald pulled out the list of people going from they have nobles all the way down to, and the rest of them. And so, and it's saying this needs to be paid attention to. It's hard. I think one of the interesting ones to focus on, I'll give you a specific, not me, but in our church, someone who's taken this extremely seriously is I think the lawyer working for legal aid for the people that get their houses foreclosed for a mortgage.
Oh, Tommy. Tommy?
Yes, I believe it's I mean, that's exactly what it was being talked about. One of those verses was, oh, we have to give our houses in pledge for the debts we owe so we can get some food, and saying, hey, we got to treat these people fairly, and he's really fighting for it.
Well, and that struck me is, when you prevent evictions, you're providing stability for families, and they're not needing the resources elsewhere.
Evictions, that's what it is.
Yes, and here it's, if you're providing for these people to have stability so they can eat, they're going to continue to work. They're going to improve their city. It's also, I think, a little bit like the broken windows idea. A little bit, when you provide for, or when you start helping, they're going to start taking responsibility as well a little bit.
That's the theme of the new roof above is, and this whole movement is now housing first, they talk about.
Yeah. Makes a huge difference.
I think it's interesting that Nehemiah was probably so in prayer with God that he kind of, he became angry over the same things that God would become angry over. And he used his voice. I would almost say he was more of a prophet. Maybe he was. Maybe that's how we characterize him. And he is a party of one, turned the whole group of Jerusalem around. So I think we don't need to underestimate that we all have a voice. And when we see wrongs, we should speak up.
Yeah.
And that's really the one of the hardest things for me to accept myself is that when I'm in a committee or a group and we spend a lot of time talking and very little time doing, and I want to say, well, get it done, people. But no, people don't move on things. We sit around and talk about it, and I get so angry.
Well, Nancy, you're always one step ahead of me. I was going to ask is how can we be, I mean, I think as Presbyterians, but, as people who want to get it right, I will say, is we study it or we discuss it to death and then nothing happens. How can we be quicker to jump into action in a positive way, not irrationally? I think I'm slowing us down already in the hypothetical.
Well, and I think several people have pointed this out, you in your lesson, but several others, that consulting God first. And so, if your plan is of God and you've prayed, then you shouldn't need to talk about it a whole lot. I mean, you've got to plan, you've got to execute in a wise fashion like Nehemiah did. But it seems to me that where we get caught up and where we get into trouble is when we start rethinking and thinking and using our own intellect to try to solve a problem rather than relying on divine guidance.
I absolutely agree. Sorry.
Yeah, we talk it to death, and we need to get out and do something.
Well, and I think after we feel like we have this call to do something, it never hurts to run it by a few people and make sure
Yeah.
they're not crazy. I don't know that Nehemiah did that, but I find that that's always helpful.
Well, and I was thinking is,
Yeah, but Barb, in our circle, which we meet Tuesday, is that, yeah, that's right.
Right.
So I have been talking to Nancy Henderson. Her husband is sick and she cannot come to, and I've been trying to talk to her about doing Zoom and would help her be a part of the group. And finally, somebody in the circle said to me, and it could be you, well, when you send her a card, put your phone number on the card and ask her to call you and talk about it. And I thought, yeah, I can do that. So I did, and she called me this week. So, and I said, well, circle is 2:00. Do you use Zoom? She said, oh yes, that's the way I connect with join us in Circle Tuesday with Zoom. And I don't remember what she looks like. I'm sure she doesn't remember what I look like, but it will be good to see each other and touch base. So when you see her, because Barb, you have talked to her.
Yeah, I have. And she's been to
Yeah.
one of our circle meetings a long time ago.
Yeah. And that's why I thought, well, maybe I can touch base the fact that she has been before.
Mhm. Sorry to get sidetracked on circle.
Oh, no.
Oh,
Well,
But Nancy, I'm not going to be there Tuesday. So
okay.
anyway,
well, Barb, I wanted to respond to your comment of it's good to consult people. I think, and we've been sort of setting this up well with the Racial Justice Task Force, is, we've prayed about what is the right thing to do, and it is responding to sort of systemic racism and trying the work to become anti-racist. And luckily, through the connectional church that we are, and just, being involved in our community, is we have wonderful people we know who we call friends, people of color, but also white people who we can consult on this work to make sure we're doing it correctly. And having those individuals you can go to, instead of forming a study committee to 5 to 7 years of General Assembly, we can respond more quickly, but also in a conscientious way, so that we may not be perfect, but we will be getting closer to right than maybe just doing our own, what we think is what may be our own will or our own understanding. We are at time, and I've got to run to go meet a baptism family, but thank y'all so much. We will meet next week as well. Any final thoughts that y'all would like to share? I love this discussion. This is the best discussion I've had over Zoom in months, so thank y'all. Right. Well, I would actually like, Nancy? Oh, well, I was going to end us in prayer, if that's all right. Would that be okay? Yeah. All right. Gracious Lord, thank you for being with us today and helping us learn about Nehemiah and all that he has to share with us. Allow us to understand that you are in control, that you place your will before us. So let us be able to understand that and do it. Be with us as we seek to be moved by the world and to act on that movement in a way that is pleasing to you. And Lord, as Nancy lifted up, it has been a sad week, many deaths and much violence in our world. So we pray those who are grieving, and we pray specifically for the family of Byron and all those people that he has influenced and shaped and helped over his lifetime. We are so grateful for all that you give to us and put in our lives. In Jesus Christ's name we pray, amen.